So, this material outlines independent candidate Arnab Khan's ongoing legal battle at the Supreme Court for the tiger symbol, framing his defiance of Election Commission administrative hurdles as a broader fight for constitutional rights and a rejection of puppet politics in Bangladesh. And jumping right into our first piece of feedback for this critique, the narrative draws a really powerful parallel between the legal battle for an election symbol and the broader struggle for constitutional rights, but the transition between technical election disputes and grand 1971 liberation ideals feels pretty abrupt.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, the material jumps so rapidly between these highly granular administrative timelines and then, sweeping ideological declarations.
Right, like refusing to be a robot or a puppet.
Exactly. You get the January 25th writ petition, and then the January 27th returning officer assigning the horse symbol, and the EC citing the canceled Progressive Democratic Party. But then we pivot straight into these massive political ideals. It just creates a gap.
It leaves the reader having to connect the dots, right, on how a specific bureaucratic denial directly represents a systemic threat to political independence.
Precisely. The connection is there in his head, but it's not fully spelled out on the page.
Well, to me, this specific administrative dispute is basically a canary in a coal mine for the broader electoral system. So, how could the material better use the timeline of events as undeniable evidence of that larger constitutional argument, rather than just acting as a sequence of dates?
We have to forge a clearer narrative link that explicitly frames the bureaucratic hurdles over the symbol allocation as a micro-example of the macro-level political interference he opposes.
So, weave them together instead of separating the timeline from the candidate's values.
Yeah, exactly. Don't just list the dates. Explicitly state something like, the returning officer's refusal to honor the gazetted tiger symbol on January 27th wasn't just an administrative oversight. It was the exact kind of puppet master politics that the 1971 Liberation War sought to dismantle.
Oh, that's strong. And then when mentioning the Supreme Court appeal following the March 3rd High Court rejection, they could frame that not just as the next legal step, but as the ultimate test of whether the state will uphold a citizen's independent electoral identity against institutional bias.
Right, because once that administrative timeline is successfully linked to his ideological stance, the material has to ensure that the historical touchstones used to support that ideology are sharply focused, which actually brings up another issue.
Yeah?
The emotional weight of the candidate's vision heavily relies on historical parallels, but the simultaneous invocation of both the 1971 Liberation War and the July 2024 Revolution dilutes the specific core message of his current independent campaign.
Deletes it how? By doing too much at once?
Essentially, yes. The text brings up the foundational ideals of 1971 right alongside frustrations regarding the July 2024 uprising's failure to eliminate systemic inequality. By giving equal weight to both historical moments without a clear hierarchy, the central theme of his unbroken identity just loses focus.
It's kind of a chronological whiplash for the reader.
Exactly. It's too much competing history.
Okay, but let me push back on that slightly. Both of these historical events are clearly crucial to the candidate's motivation, right? They inform his stance against political interference. So how can the material streamline these dual timelines so they compound each other's impact rather than competing for the spotlight?
Well, you anchor the candidate's personal struggle for integrity in one primary historical lens to drive the central thesis. And then you use the other as a supporting, evolving context that necessitates his current actions.
So you established a clear hierarchy.
Right. Frame the 1971 Liberation War as the unshakable bedrock of his anti-puppet philosophy. And then position the 2024 revolution specifically as the unfulfilled promise that forces his hand today.
I see. So revise the section discussing 2024 to emphasize his statement that the inequality wasn't removed.
Exactly. Because that positions his ongoing Supreme Court fight for the tiger symbol not just as a nod to the past, but as the active, modern continuation of the unresolved 2024 revolution.
Built directly upon the foundation of 1971. That makes a lot of sense. So taking that refined, ideologically strong message, how does this actually land with the people on the ground in Jamalpur?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. Because our final point of critique today is that the candidate's emotional message to the residents of Jamalpur showcases a strong grassroots connection, but it leans so heavily into the personal martyrdom of the legal fight that it risks overshadowing his actionable vision for the constituency's future.
It really does. The narrative spends extensive time detailing his refusal to compromise, his willingness to, quote-unquote, lose like a hero, and his touching Eid greetings to the youth.
Yeah.
But it leaves the audience wanting a clearer picture of what his independent candidacy will actually achieve for Jamalpur. The heavy focus on his personal struggle for integrity inadvertently minimizes his background as a social worker who wants to deliver tangible results.
Which leads to a pretty challenging question, I think. Is there a risk that, by focusing so intensely on the martyr framing of the Supreme Court battle, the candidate might inadvertently come across as a single-issue candidate, like someone fighting only for his own electoral identity, rather than the people's needs?
Oh, definitely. There's a massive risk there. The suggestion here is to balance the rhetoric of personal political sacrifice with concrete elements of his local vision. You have to ensure the electorate sees him not just as a defiant victim of a biased system, but as a capable, forward-thinking leader.
Okay, so give me a concrete example of how to balance that out in the text.
Sure. When outlining his emotional address apologizing for his inability to campaign since January 22nd, explicitly connect his legal tenacity to his dedication to the community.
Oh, I get it. Like, translate his personal fight into a public benefit.
Exactly. You could add phrasing like, just as I refuse to accept the horse symbol and bow to a rigged system, I will refuse to accept unjust policies or subpar infrastructure for Jamalpur. This fight for the tiger is proof of how fiercely I will fight for your rights.
Wow. Yeah, that completely flips it from a personal complaint to a campaign promise. It uses the symbol dispute as a metaphor for how he'll fight for his constituents.
It makes the legal struggle relevant to the everyday voter.
That's brilliant. So, just to briefly recap our main points today. First, explicitly link the administrative timeline to the broader ideological battle against puppet politics. Weave those dates and legal rejections directly into statements of political defiance.
Right. Don't leave the reader guessing.
Second, streamline the historical narrative between 1971 and 2024 to maintain focus. Position 2024 as the unfulfilled catalyst for his current adherence to 1971 values.
Give the history a hierarchy.
Exactly. And finally, ensure the emotional appeal to Jamalpur residents highlights his capacity as a leader, not just his personal sacrifice. Let the voters see what he can actually do for them.
Spot on.
We really invite the listener to implement these suggestions and submit your revised work back in for a future critique. Thanks for listening.